In the summer of 1911, a second crisis in Morocco threatened to plunge Europe into full-scale war. This was provoked by German claims that France had not lived up to agreements made at Algeciras in 1906. As a result, the Kaiser ordered a gunboat, the Panther, to the Moroccan port of Agadir on the Atlantic coast. At the same time, demands for compensation were sent to Paris. As the Agadir Crisis unfolded, British public opinion became increasingly anti-German, with vital interests in Gibraltar and the Mediterranean clearly compromised by this German military presence. This sentiment was echoed by the government, with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, David Lloyd George, using his Mansion House speech in July 1911 to issue a stern warning. As the crisis deepened, negotiations continued, with both sides clear that Britain would not tolerate the continued presence of the German Navy in Morocco. Eventually, after 8 weeks of crisis, and after war had nearly broken out on a number of occasions, a compromise was brokered in November. Germany would accept French claims in Morocco in exchange for a small concession in the French Congo. Europe had again stood on the brink of war before coming to an agreement of sorts that really pleased no one. 3 years later, time was to run out, and a further compromise was not to be found. However, ironically, this was to come at a time of prosperity and technological improvement for the people of Europe and the Western world, unparalleled in history. Life for many, although not all, had been improved dramatically through advances in medicine, sanitation, housing, and welfare. New recreational developments such as the cinema and increasingly organized sport were entertaining people in a way unimaginable even a generation earlier. Hard-fought victories had also been won politically, and these had extended franchises, increased trade union activities, and improved social liberty. This all appeared to suggest that the science and technology that had driven the advances of the late 19th century were continuing to create a better and more prosperous world. In April 1912, just a few months after Roald Amundsen and his four-man team had successfully beaten Captain Scott to the South Pole, this seemed to be epitomized with the launching of the luxury steamliner HMS Titanic. This opulent palace of the ocean was a marvel of modern engineering and the world's largest ship. But only 5 days into her maiden voyage, the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank into the cold and icy depths of the North Atlantic. Its sinking, with the loss of over 500 lives, was perhaps a portent of things to come. For just over 2 years later, the hope and optimism of the new century had evaporated on the battlefields of World War I, with the science and technology that had shaped the West's rise now seemingly plotting its downfall. Machines of warfare had been developed in the 19th century, and certainly as far back as the American Civil War, thousands had been killed in battle by modern weaponry such as heavy artillery and the machine gun. Tactics too had begun to change, with Strasbourg a few years after the Union's victory becoming the first modern city to have its civilian population deliberately targeted by artillery when it was pounded by the Prussians in August 1870. However, nothing prepared the world for the destruction and death tolls of 1914-18. The Bosnian annexation crisis of 1908 and the Second Moroccan confrontation at Agadir had brought the great powers close to conflict, but on both occasions, monarchs, politicians, and diplomats had ensured that the world stepped back from the brink. As Europe teetered towards the abyss, a similar sense of foreboding faced the Qing dynasty that had ruled China for 250 years. War against Japan in 1894-95 had shown clear deficiencies in government and army organization, and these had again been highlighted by the ease with which foreign troops had invaded during the Boxer Rebellion at the beginning of the century. In 1911, a revolution broke out in the industrial city of Wuhan on the Yangtze River in central China. This soon spread, and no amount of constitutional promises could save the government from its own inefficiency and corruption. As China edged towards civil war, Sun Yat-sen, the Nationalist Party leader who had spent 16 years in exile in Europe and North America, returned to take charge. China now split into two factions, with Sun Yat-sen's forces dominating the south, while the army, under the control of General Yuan in the north, remained loyal to Puyi, the boy emperor. Ultimately, a compromise of sorts was agreed, with Puyi forced to abdicate. But unity was short-lived, and China was to suffer numerous internal battles over the next 15 years or so. In particular, these focused on the struggle between the nationalists and the northern warlords. It was not until 1927 that Sun Yat-sen's successor, Chiang Kai-shek, was able to defeat these various warlords and restore some semblance of order and unity to the country. When war did eventually break out in Europe, as it did in the Balkans in 1912, none of the six great powers were directly involved in the fighting. However, all had vested interests in the region, and the outcomes of the two Balkan Wars had a direct bearing on events leading to the Great War soon after. As a prelude to the First Balkan War, the governments of Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece united in March 1912 to form the Balkan League, an alliance against the Ottoman Empire. In October 1912, this force attacked Ottoman territory from the west and was soon at the gates of Istanbul. To all intents and purposes, this expelled the Ottoman Empire from continental Europe for the first time in 500 years, and a conference in London formalized this victory. However, the conference also created the new state of Albania to block Serbia's access to the Adriatic Sea. This was done at the insistence of Austria-Hungary, a move deeply resented by Serbia, and one that only further increased tension between the governments in Belgrade and Vienna. The peace brought by the London Treaty, therefore, proved to be no more than an interlude, with war breaking out once again in the Balkans within a month. This was when Bulgaria, also unhappy with the London Agreement, attacked Serbia. However, Greece, Romania, and the Ottoman Empire soon came to Serbia's defense, and the Bulgarians were quickly routed. Although all gained from the Second Balkan War, it was Serbia in particular that was to profit, nearly doubling in size geographically. This allowed her, in the summer of 1913, to field an army of some 500,000 men. Austria-Hungary had always seen Serbia as its primary rival in the region, which was why it had annexed Bosnia with its capital Sarajevo in 1908. But many ethnic Serbians lived in Bosnia, and so Austria-Hungary now grew increasingly concerned for its own security in the region. As a result, officials in Vienna eagerly looked for an excuse to clip Serbian wings. Serbia, meanwhile, grew stronger in the knowledge that it enjoyed a treaty of protection with Russia. Tension between the two had also been increased because of the activities of Black Hand, a Serbian-based anti-Austrian terrorist group. This was directed by the secretive Apis, who Austrian spies reported was a colonel in the Serbian army. The group was active throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the years before 1914 and was responsible for a series of bombings and assassinations, including an attempt on the life of Emperor Franz Joseph himself in 1911. Black Hand drew support from many students and radicals, although it also received at least some unofficial support within the Serbian government and military. The group was dedicated to the development of pan-Slav nationalism in general, and to Bosnian independence in particular. Apis was to play a central role in the decision to send a young 19-year-old member over the border into Bosnia a year later in 1914. But even he could not have imagined the extraordinary consequences that this was to have, with the shot fired in Sarajevo at 10:45 on the morning of the 28th of June 1914, echoing across Europe, soon unleashing a war unlike any seen before. Thanks so much for watching our video today. We really hope you enjoyed it. If you did so, please think about subscribing or giving us a thumbs up. Please follow Hatcher History on Instagram or at .shop.